habitat loss for migrating birds and all kinds of other animals. And we're interested in how these lakes revegetate and what the carbon effects from these, when the land surface turns from wet to dry, and how it evolves over time. So we're hoping to do that.
And Claudia, I'm not sure if it's me or are people also having a hard time keeping track of what Claudia is saying? Is her voice getting interrupted for you as well?
I'm noticing skipping a little.
Skipping a little bit. Claudia, yeah. Are you with internet at home?
I'm at home.
Okay. All right, so we're just gonna be patient. I didn't know if it was me or if it was, but I heard you saying that it's about lakes that are disappearing.
Yes.
I didn't catch the rest. And
okay, so we're interested in understanding what happens to the land surface as the lakes disappear, how they revegetate with different communities, and what the carbon emissions are from these systems.
Oh, okay. Huh.
So as you get more plant material, then I'm assuming that's what is going to happen, right? That should be helpful to some extent. I wonder if that offsets a little bit about the carbon that's being emitted back into the atmosphere.
Yes, and it's very hotly debated. Almost nobody is measuring that part. The estimates are that for this century, it will help. Next century, if we continue with the warming, the plant uptake won't matter because the emissions will be overwhelmingly large. So it'll buy us some time. But different plant communities emit methane, which is a much stronger greenhouse gas. Others emit CO2. And then in the Arctic, it's interesting, shrubs like woody plants are becoming much more common. And they trap snow, and that heats the ground over the winter, so they can actually accelerate the thaw. So the plants themselves can destabilize the ground, and that's one thing I'm really interested in.
It sounds interesting.
All right, I'm gonna give people a few more minutes. So for those who have just arrived, we're chatting a little bit, Claudia here, just giving people a few more minutes to log in. We created this waiting room so that I would try to figure out like who could possibly be here by mistakes and to cause mischief of all sorts. I'm not the best person to be making this selection because my tendency is to let everyone in and just see what they're up to, but you know, kind of daring them to do anything. But letting everyone in. We have 13 people so far, so we'll give people more minute. But I want to tell you, Claudia, a little bit about us, about our group before we start. Most of the people that you see here, most of us are involved in the citizen science program that we call FLOW, which is used to meet every week at the Bolsa Chica and collect plankton. And this program has been has existed for about 7 years. And this is the first time that we're interrupting our weekly activities since we started 7 years ago because of COVID-19. Our group is a part of a network that sends samples to the state. So the samples that we collect actually get examined by scientists who work for the state. And and so these are amazing people. Some of them I've known since the beginning. Some of them are newcomers, and there are a few more who couldn't make today, but who will be watching this recording later. And the idea here is that these are the people that are going to be talking to other citizen scientists, volunteers, relatives, friends. I'm asking all of them to help us get the word out about your project and to bug those cousins that they might have all the way up in San Francisco, call that aunt they haven't spoken with in years who lives in, I don't know, Sacramento or Fresno. And that's the idea, is that from here, we're going to reach out to other people within the state of California. We also have a special guest here, Maddie. Maddie, I'm going to put you on the spot. So Maddie, do you mind waving at us? There you go. There's Maddie. Matt is a journalist, and she's writing an article about citizen science. So
Yeah.
we're excited to have her here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So before we start with Claudia's presentation, I want to just make sure that you guys don't have, if you have any questions or any things that you want to say, any kind of like important notes that you have to share before we get started? No? All right, so then without further ado, I'm going to introduce Claudia Shimshik. She's my professor. She was my professor a few years ago, and it was one of the hardest classes I took. It was really hard for me because everything was very, very interesting, but there was so much information to learn. But it was also one of the most exciting courses I took because we actually got to go on field trips. It was the only actual course that required us to go, and we went on a several days on a excursion that we took as a group. So that was really very important for me to know that I was in the right department. So Claudia is working in this project that you guys all have heard me talk about. And I'm going to give her some time to explain what the project is and give a presentation to you. And after that, we're going to have Kim facilitate a discussion. So everyone will have a chance to ask questions. And I am, like I said before, recording this. So you get to watch this again later if you want, or you can share that with your friends and family. Good? All right, so with that, I'm gonna pass it on to Claudia, and I'm gonna let you share your screen. Hold on, let me figure out how to do this here.
I think I'm already allowed to do
Already
it.
allowed? Perfect. Okay. So then
Oh, no.
No?
No?
Huh, hold
So
on.
first of all, I want to thank you for having me. And Joanna is obviously one of my favorite students. She's been really a great resource and also a great friend to work with. And I've not done this a lot, so I hope you ask me a lot of questions if I say anything you don't understand, or that's, anyway, I had a very little experience with this kind of work, but I'm very excited to start and meet you all today.
All right, so you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. So then put it on projector mode. Can you see the presentation view now? Yeah.
Yes, it's
Okay.
up.
All right, so we're hoping to evaluate the impact of the stay-at-home order in California on air quality in California, specifically on fossil fuel emissions and fossil fuel consumption during this time. And it's a collaboration with another professor from UC Riverside and another one from UC Irvine, Steve Davis, and hopefully a couple of people from JPL, the NASA JPL Center in Pasadena, and maybe UC Berkeley. So we're still working on the project, but we started the data collection. So a main ask that we have for people like you is to collect plants from all over California. Specifically, we're interested in invasive grasses that grow during the winter and spring period in California, and they're very common across the whole state. And this ties into a number of research questions. One is, did fossil fuel emissions, especially from carbon emissions, actually go down during the stay-at-home order, given how many jobs were called as essential in the end? And how will this develop over time? Are we going to see a second peak and maybe go back into lockdown? How much is the economy recovering and at what speed? Are people changing the way they go to work? Are they going to telecommute? Are they going to not use mass transit? So all of those things may change and continue to change in the future. So we want to use a combination of physical measurements of trace gases like CO2 and plants, and also traffic and electricity data to understand this throughout the stay-at-home period and as we go forward, hopefully the point where we can fully emerge from the pandemic. So a major goal is to measure the carbon isotope composition of invasive grasses. And here's a picture that I took a couple of weeks ago with my kids on one of the hikes that we were allowed to do here in Irvine and Bomber Canyon. And you can see just an abundance of invasive grasses in the background. So they're really common. They came with the settlers and agriculture into the west, they've spread, they dry up in the summer and connect different native plant communities and major fire hazards, so all kinds of impacts from grasses, but they can be a great proxy for us to measure air quality. Specifically, plants absorb carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, which you all know, to make plant material. And this CO2 is recorded as they grow. So the parts of the plant are recording the early growing season, and then other parts of the plant actually record later growing season. So they integrate this, and different parts of the plant can be used to get to different time points. And the CO2, we can't see changes in the CO2 concentration that we would expect from lower emissions in the region during the stay-at-home period, but we can see changes in the isotopes. So carbon, not all CO2 is normal carbon, is different types of carbon. There's 12 carbon, and then there's 13 and 14 carbon. So on the left, you can see the normal 12 carbon. So a little bit over 99% of all carbon is 12 carbon. So it has a nucleus that consists of 6 protons and 6 neutrons and a bunch of electrons, 12 electrons, and 6 electrons, sorry. And so mass 12. And it has a number of siblings, and they're heavier, but they behave exactly the same in terms of chemistry, but they're a little heavier. And I always, so you imagine when plants grab CO2 from the air, it's easier for them to get the lighter carbon because all of their biochemical reactants respond more quickly with the 12, but they occasionally capture the other ones. And this ratio can change over time. So plants will, in their biomass through photosynthesis, record these isotope ratios from the air. And we're specifically interested in the 12 carbon and 14 carbon. 14 carbon is incredibly rare. So 1 in 10 to the 15 or 12 to 15 molecules is radiocarbon. It's super, super rare. And you've maybe heard about radiocarbon for dating purposes. So radiocarbon is often used to date things in archaeology. It's an isotope that's formed in the atmosphere when cosmic ray interacts with our atmosphere, and it basically interacts with the nitrogen in our atmosphere and turns it into carbon, radioactive carbon. So this radioactive carbon is formed naturally in the atmosphere. It oxidizes to CO2, and then plants take it up. So everything that's alive right now is a certain amount of radiocarbon. And then the radioactivity will take the radiocarbon isotope away over time. The half-life is about 6,000 years. So anything older than 50,000 years doesn't have any more radiocarbon in it. So old carbon pools, like fossil fuels, formed when the dinosaurs were around. So they're hundreds of millions of years old. And they just contain 12 carbon because when the dinosaurs were around, there was radiocarbon in the atmosphere. But since then, the radiocarbon in the dinosaur and the plants that grew during that time has decayed away, and only the 12's left over. So it's pure 12 and 13 carbon. Any plant that's alive today contains radiocarbon, and anything that's alive today is eating plants, including people, animals, and so on, emit 14 carbon and 12 carbon through their respiration. So all the kind of new biomass, new carbon sources are all enriched in radiocarbon, and fossil fuels have 0 radiocarbon in them. So you can use that for dating, but you can also use it for mixtures. So you can, when you measure what's left in a current sample, you can estimate how much came from an old source versus a new source. The other way that we can make radiocarbon is actually through nuclear bomb testing. So on the right, you see this curve from the 1950s and 60s, and the bars are above ground nuclear bomb tests. And the curve that you see on top of it is the amount of radiocarbon in the atmosphere, in CO2. And you can see that during the 50s and 60s, when we had a lot of bomb tests, radiocarbon in the atmosphere actually doubled. And then after the referendum on the Test Ban Treaty was signed, radiocarbon has gone down again. And this is because this enriched CO2 that had extra radiocarbon from the nuclear bombs It's mixed into the ocean, it's mixed into the land biosphere, and we're emitting fossil fuels as we go forward, more and more fossil fuels. You can actually dilute this with pure 12 carbon. Anyway, so
just to reiterate, so fossil fuel, because it's really old, will be mostly carbon 12.
100%.
100% carbon 12, and then new stuff that is growing and from the CO2 from respiration, if it's really, really far away from any kind of fossil fuel source, would be rich in carbon 12 and 13. Oh, sorry, carbon 14 and 13 as well.
Yes, the 13 doesn't really change, and because it's not a radioactive isotope.
Got it.
And you can see that anything really that grew over the last 50 years in particular has a lot of extra radiocarbon in it. So if we look at the time series of air, CO2 in air, or in plants, which are basically recording air for us, and compare that to what we know the level of 14 to 12 carbon was last year and will be next year, we're hoping to see a change in that. And because radiocarbon is so incredibly rare, small changes are easier to measure than changes in concentration. So there's a lot of debate whether we actually can see a decline in CO2 in the air, but we're more likely to see a change in the isotope ratio. So we're hoping to collect these plants, send them, and then they come to my lab, and then we basically carbon date them. And then we hope to see a difference from what we would expect based on the time series that we have in the lab. And then so we know how much radiocarbon should be in the air right now. We know that fossil fuels are not emitting any extra. And we know how this ratio here on this curve has changed over time. We know that for the globe. We also know that really well for California. And we're expecting a change in the trajectory of this curve. So Joanna helped me make this slide. So we have a couple of pictures that basically show some early work that just come out showing that we can expect changes in pollution levels, and carbon and CO2 emissions are co-emitted with other emissions. So let's say if most of our carbon comes from traffic, there's a lot of nitrous oxides that are emitted from cars that lead to smog. So in a way, these carbon isotopes are a tracer for fossil fuel and air pollution in general. And we're not sure how long this will last. There's also been some work in China and other parts that have seen changes in carbon and nitrogen aerosol, so improvements in air quality. Okay. Then we have a participation question, I guess. So what do you think, how would you think that these plants would be different from, so would they contain more or less of the older carbon than grasses that grew before the lockdown?
What do you guys think?
So if fossil fuel emissions actually went down, would they have more or less radiocarbon in them during the lockdown?
So the carbon 14 is the old stuff, is the stuff that you get in the plant will get if there's a lot of fossil fuels around them, emitting carbon around them. So what do you guys think? If this notion is correct, the one that we're seeing in the news, that because of the lockdowns, there's less fossil fuel burning and less carbon 14 in the air, you think we're going to see more or less of the carbon 14 in the plants?
Less.
Probably much less.
Yes. Yeah. So as you saw, the general trend for radiocarbon in the atmosphere is at the moment it's downward. And we're hoping that we'll see a decline in this decline, basically. So a little bit higher than expected ratios. So, and I wanted to show you a couple actual figures from scientific papers. Can you see this screen, or is it still showing the PowerPoint?
The PowerPoint.
You can see the PowerPoint.
Not a Zoom expert yet. But so here is a study that was conducted in 2000. You can see that now, right?
Now we can see, yes.
So this was done, similar study in 2005. Bill Riley et al. And they collected invasive grasses across California, and you can see the radiocarbon content in the different colors. So plants that contain more fossil carbon, which has less radiocarbon in it, show more in the red colors, and then plants that look more like a well-mixed atmosphere that has more modern and more radiocarbon in it are in the blue colors. And you can clearly see the Bay Area and the LA area in this data set.
Yes. So
So
whatever
this-
have more
this
traffic,
is-
right?
Yeah, so this is what California air pollution looks like in terms of radiocarbon in a normal year. And so we can measure this forward and predict what it should look like in 2020 and then compare it to our actual data. So this involves these point samples, involves time series, and a lot of modeling of CO2 consumption and production in different areas. So we're hoping to collaborate with a number of people that have this expertise.
Can you all see the areas in the map that are really colorful, in which the colors, you go from dark blue into the greens, the yellows, the orange, and finally the red? Where's the reddest part in this map?
Right
LA.
here.
LA, right? So what does that mean? The plants are getting most of their carbon from what source? From respiration of animals or from like fossil fuels that are being burned by the cars? Probably, right? Like that's pretty visible in the data. What's the other second big hotspot here?
Bay Area.
Right, lots of
Right.
cars there too.
Yep.
Very interesting.
Yeah, and what's also really cool, so there's been a recent paper, can you see this one?
Yes.
Map. So a colleague from UC Berkeley just figured out how to measure plant activity from space using something called solar-induced fluorescence. They basically measure photosynthesis from a satellite.
Wow.
And
That's
this is a
crazy.
paper that just came out, and you can see kind of different plant types, and then you overlay this with a land cover map, and you can kind of figure out what of this vegetation is a grass versus a tree and so on. And so we can actually track when these plants grew and then also get a time for our emission estimates. Okay, and then now I'm gonna try to do this one more time because I don't know how to switch the different screens. So we're hoping to combine these measurements of plants with continuous measurements of CO2 and methane and CO, which are all different carbon species that are emitted during fossil fuel combustion. We're doing this with a van. So my colleague, Francesca Hopkins in UC Riverside has a car that's been outfitted with a number of instruments, and they can drive, or they have been driving these transects around the LA basin. You can see the blue transect is one thing that our student drove a couple of weeks ago. And then we also have continuous samplers on the rooftop of UC Irvine that are always measuring CO2 and methane and CO. We're also measuring radiocarbon in the air all the time in monthly samples. For the last 10 years, we've been doing that. And I'm hoping that we combine the plant data with these gas species measurements. And then Steve Davis, another colleague at UC Irvine, has access to traffic data and electricity data from Caltrans and other GPS measures. And I'm hoping that we can collaborate with NASA GPL teams that work with the OCO3 satellite that measures CO2 in the air column above different areas, and also the Tropomi satellite, which has this ability to measure photosynthesis from space, which is just mind-blowing. It's a really new technology, really exciting. So we will have an estimate of how fossil fuel emissions have changed from the CO2 ratios. We have an estimate of how plants were active and when. And we have the radiocarbon data, and that hopefully will let us actually answer these questions of whether the lockdown and as we emerge from the lockdown, changes in behavior due to physical distancing and changes, maybe permanent changes in the way we work and commute, will affect our air quality and can help us get to a carbon neutral future.
All right.
Fascinating.
All right, before we open for questions, I just want to review here. I have here my envelope, Okay, now my grasses are pretty dry now, but this is the same ones that I used for the video that I made. So I just want to make sure I show, Claudia, I'm going to close your screen sharing here. No. Yeah, oh, there you go. That's perfect. And so now, hold on. So this is the envelope that I made for that video. And basically, you know, you just need a couple of types of grasses. In the video, you kind of see me trying to identify the different grasses. If you are unsure and you need help, you can bug Kim. Kim is a plant identification expert here in the
Well,
group.
that's very nice of you to say.
So we can also, you know, go online and take a look at some photos of those grasses. But it should fit, you know, it should be, you just need a tiny little bit of each one, like one shoot of the plant, and then a little note explaining where you got it from, the date that you collected it, and your best guess at what is it that you put in an envelope. And then you close it, try to put everything inside. No plastic bag because we don't want to mold. And then the address, which is, I know it's inverted for you all, but it's on the website, and I will make sure to forward. Oops. Hold on, you all disappeared. I did something wrong here. Okay, hold on. Yeah, I'll make sure that you all receive a link with the video again and the address that you can forward to everyone you know.
Yeah, and it's really amazing if you can help us with this. And it's pretty time sensitive because we had so much rain in April, especially in Southern California, and the grasses are really at the end of their growing season. So we'll need to collect these samples in the next few weeks. And we've already missed a few. So we're looking for both oats or Avena and bromo species because they're both very common across California, but they grow at slightly different rates and slightly different time periods. So we're hoping that different species will cover different parts of this period. And if you don't get exactly the species we wanted, it's not ideal, but we can hopefully also work with that because any annual plant will record the signal. We're just trying to normalize other factors that could influence it a little bit as well.
So with that, I'm now going to open up for questions. And Kim, would you mind moderating? I think the best way is just raise your hand if you have a question. And if several people raise their hand, Kim is going to keep track of who's next.
Judy, do you have not Judy, Vicky, do you have a question?
Well, actually, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, great. I wondered if you could clarify the types of the bromus and the avena. I didn't quite understand from the video. I couldn't really identify them very well. Perhaps I should go online and look for what they look like specifically, because I know there's so many kinds of grasses.
Yeah, the most important thing for us is that they're an annual grass. So if you have a plant that grows for more than 1 year, it will integrate carbon over the whole lifetime.
I see. Okay.
So annual grasses.
I see. Okay.
Most of all of the invasive grasses are annual. Most of the native species, or many of the native species, are perennial. And we're looking for oats and cheatgrass. And the subspecies, we will figure it out in the lab, but we can, even if you get the genus right, we can combine that into our data set.
Okay.
And Vicky, we can help you. We can send you some better pictures and give you.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yes, we can definitely do
And
that.
also, I'm wondering, are there any particular places that you're looking for specifically that we should go and get the samples from? I live in Irvine in Woodbridge, and it's all it's all mowed.
Perfect excuse to go on a road trip, huh?
Exactly.
Like, no, I'm sorry, honey. We have to go on this road trip. I must collect plants to send to this
Exactly.
Yeah,
Which
ideally it would be away from a
field or roadside is going to have, especially in disturbed soils, you're going to see a lot of these weeds, which are all dead right now for the most part.
Would you like for us to go on a road trip? Any particular place? There would be a good reason that we go somewhere. Are there any areas that you're looking for in particular?
So I think the emission change might be the biggest in cities. And the 2005 study they tried to stay away from major freeways and direct point sources, but these grasses I think if we have enough from a city, it's okay if they will integrate the air around them for many miles. We
So
also
you
need samples from
prefer,
rural parts of California because they should match the background that we're expecting.
so are
And
you looking more for city
both.
samples? Or
We need both. So if you want to do a remote field trip, I got one from the Carrizo Plains.
oh, nice.
Yeah, I wasn't able to go, but somebody brought me a sample.
Oh, that's
But
nice.
we're looking for both. We're looking for areas of large changes like the LA Basin, any part of the LA Basin, the Coachella Valley, the Imperial Valley, the Bay Area, but we also need some samples from more rural parts of California.
Okay, good to know. Thank you.
Good questions. Good questions. Jerry, you had your hand up, right? Sorry,
Well,
Cam. I can't resist.
That's okay, jump in, Joanne. Jerry, you're up.
It may have been answered, but so I know a friend in Marin County, but he's not a real plant person, nor am I. But I think if you said if he sends an annual grass, you guys can kind of figure it out, because I don't know if he knows the specific genus or species or whatever. So
Yeah.
just, we're looking at grasses, so.
Yes,
Okay.
and if they send an annual grass, ideally with the seed, the flower, the seed attached, then we can identify it. If it's just the leaves, it's a little harder.
Good, thank you.
Oh, okay. So if the person can
helps.
get the flower, that helps. Okay, so if we can get the grass with the flower, that's
Yes.
better. Oh,
But
good to know.
we're very lucky. We're surrounded by great botanists at UC Irvine, and I have one grad student lined up that will help me identify the plants once we get them. We're going to let them sit for a week to make sure they're virus free, and then start organizing them by area and by species, the genus.
Gwen?
Yeah, do you know how good iNaturalist is at identifying the species you want? Because that might be a good way for people to sort of check.
Claudia, do you know what iNaturalist is? Oh, this is really cool. It's an app that we citizen scientists use a lot. So volunteers and citizen scientists and educators, they use this app called iNaturalist. And it's this big database on your phone for things that you don't know what they are. So frogs, birds, ants. And experts will go online and they will identify something, post a few pictures, and then the volunteers can then go on that app and see. So Gwen, can you check that? Do you have
So-
a list there?
Well, so the artificial intelligence on it is really good these days. I don't know how well it works for grasses, but it gets you pretty close.
Okay.
And you don't know what it is. So you take a picture and then it says, what are you looking at? And you can tell it what you're looking at, or if you click on the thing, it'll analyze your picture and give you some choices that are close. So if that would be a good way to help people at least narrow it down if you know that it gets close. Because you can take
So that's a job for our citizen scientists. Download iNaturalist and let's
Yeah, we can
test it,
check.
'cause this would
Yeah.
be great. We could add that to the information that we're sending out, that people could use an iNaturalist if that's available.
Yeah, and then when you do that too, it takes a GPS point if you have your phone set to do that. So then they could enter it in iNaturalist and you'd have a location, a photo, and then they could send you the sample.
That would be fantastic.
Oh, that's great. Amber, are you writing all this down? I'm recording. Yes. All right, this is a perfect project for some of our citizen scientists who are bored at home, looking for something to do. Maybe our naturalists too. We can ask them tomorrow.
So we're not necessarily looking for like nicely manicured front and golf course lawns because they irrigated and get cut a lot. So, and it'd be hard for us to identify the species. And they might be recording the air now. We're looking for the type of invasive grasses that grow in kind of abandoned lots and in between desert species. And they're kind of at the end of their life cycle right now.
Letty, I have a question. I'm wondering about the C13, C12 ratio, because you said that the plants prefer the C12 because it's lighter. So it sounds like and if fossil fuels are the same with the preference toward C12, it just seems like the C12 keeps going up and up and up, and the C13 would stay the same or decrease. Is that right?
Okay, so radiocarbon is the radioactive element, and it disappears after about 6 or the half-life 6,000 years. So it disappears after about 60,000 years if you don't add any more. 13 carbon is a stable isotope. So the ratio of 12 and 13 carbon on the planet was set when the Earth formed, and it's never changing, but they kind of distribute at different rates. And we actually do see a change in the air between kind of the dinosaur time and now, but it has to do with the evolution of C4 plants. So C3, when the dinosaurs were around, and I just like talking about dinosaurs, so during that time, all plants used the C3 photosynthesis pathway. And later on, when the climate became more, CO2 levels dropped, the climate became more seasonal. There's lots of debate why C4 plants even evolved, but it happened many times in many areas. And C4 plants are mostly grasses and plants that grow in high light, dry environments, and some of the Atriplex species are C4 plants. And they use a different photosynthesis pathway, and they don't care so much about the isotopes they're fixing, so they're less picky.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna pause here. I'm gonna pause because people might be confused because now there are new Cs.
Yes.
Oh.
So now there are all these new Cs now. So before we were talking about different types of carbon,
Yes.
C12, C13,
Yes.
C14. You all got that, right? The different Cs for carbon and where they're come from, and that's what changed about their weight and the ratios of atoms. Okay, got that. Now Claudia is talking about different group of Cs, and that's a classification for plants, and that has to do with the way the plant does photosynthesis. So C4 plants versus C3 plants, they do photosynthesis differently. And what she's saying, like, we still don't know why they do it. So it's the difference between certain plants like cacti. So think of cacti, bromeliads, and pineapples and whatnot, versus corn, right? Am I saying this right? Corn and grasses and so that is out. Did I mess up? Oh my gosh, she's gonna take away my. She's gonna revert that I passed her course.
Well, in the say grasses are relatively new to the planet.
Okay.
And so let's say a tree, they open their stomach, they pick up CO2, and their enzymes that fix the carbon into something that eventually becomes a solid molecule is really picky, and it prefers 12 carbon, the lighter mass carbon. Grasses are adapted to growing in these more extreme conditions. Every time a plant does photosynthesis, they lose a lot of water. So grasses evolved in drier spaces. So when they open their stomata to take up CO2, they do that for a shorter time. And they just grab any carbon that's around. So they actually end up fixing more of the heavier 13 carbon.
Right. So that's the C3.
Mm-hmm. That's a C4, grass are C4 plants.
That's C4 with the cacti and all okay, that she's gonna take away my my pass on that course.
Well, you don't have your PhD yet, right?
Yeah. I'm
add another year to your program.
I'm in trouble now.
Anyway,
but you understand the distinction she's making about plants that can be picky, that grow in a lot of water, like trees, right? And grasses that have to grow in really harsh environments. So they're going to be selecting the kind of carbon differently. Some will be pickier than others. And that has to do with these evolutionary processes.
Yeah. So the fossil fuel that we're burning is all C3 photosynthesis pathway, all trees, and they contain a lot less of the heavier 13C carbon. So you can actually, since the Industrial Revolution, we can see a decline in the 13C in the atmospheric CO2 as well. But it has to do with the shift in plant communities across the globe.
Claudia, because the climate is getting hotter and there's more stress on all the plants in general, and you said that C4 is an evolutionary adaptation to drier climates, is it likely that some of the plants that are now C3 photosynthesizing potentially could adapt to more of a C4 situation?
It's not clear. These plants, so normal plants with the typical C3 pathway actually do better at higher CO2 levels as well. So there's these competing stressors. drier and more extreme would benefit the grasses, but the higher CO2 levels in the air from all our emissions would benefit this normal pathway. It's not clear. So there's like different environmental drivers are pushing plants in different directions. But C4 plants have all kinds of other benefits. So they're more salt tolerant, they're more light tolerant, they have evolved, I don't know, over 10 times on different continents over different geological time periods. They're not just, so plants are always through photosynthesize them. They're not just interested in carbon or water. They have to manage their energy budget, their carbon budget, and their water budget at all times. So there's different trade-offs that go into that calculation.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Okay. If we have a few more minutes, I know it's a little off topic, but I'd love to hear a little more about your permafrost studies. Is that okay, Joanna?
That's a great idea.
Okay, yeah, so I have kind of two, in addition to this, a lot of my work revolves around the carbon cycle and radiocarbon, and I do two other things. One is to look at air pollution, so we look at aerosols, where we look at, we measure radiocarbon in aerosol to understand how much of the air pollution comes from fires versus fossil fuel emissions. So I have a number of projects in the Arctic where we're trying to understand how much pollution is imported into the Arctic from lower latitudes from fossil fuel emissions, and how much is coming from vegetation fires in the Arctic. You can also see that in the isotopes of the smoke particles. And then the majority of my work actually just looks at emissions of CO2 and methane from different ecosystems in the Arctic as they thaw. So the Arctic is already warmed by, it's warming at twice the rate as the planet on average. And we're expecting permafrost to disappear by the end of the century or a little after that. And Arctic ecosystems in their soils contain 30 to 50% of all organic carbon on the planet. So it's basically a big compost heap that's currently frozen, and we're thawing it out in the next 60 years. And so a lot of the carbon that's frozen in these soils is really, really old. And so again, I can use radiocarbon to see emissions of this older carbon coming out of the ecosystems when I look at isotopes in the emissions.
And can I interrupt? So the way that they do that is also very interesting, right? Can I just talk a little bit about the method? So they have to create like little capsules to put on top of the soil and catch some of the air that is coming out of the soil as the soil is defrosting. So some people in your lab are actually very good at creating these gadgets and building things. You guys actually build things sometimes to do
Yeah,
that.
we just built the first sampler. So there's a lot of evidence that a lot of older permafrost carbon is coming out during the winter, but most Arctic research has only measured things in the summer, and we just kind of have the technology to measure gases in the winter. It's dark, it's cold, it's hard to get there. And we're building a system that can collect emissions in the winter under the snow and bring them back here, measure the isotopic composition, and then figure out how much of it is from thawing permafrost versus current plants and microbes. Yeah, and it's a bit scary. So the permafrost carbon stocks are going to be really important if we aggressively curb fossil fuel emissions. So if we, as a society and globe, on the globe, decide to really go after the fossil fuel emissions, then the permafrost and the legacy of the warming that we've already done to it will continue, and it's going to be a relatively large feedback. So these systems are already warm, and they're not, unless we cool the climate, they're not going to stop warming, and this carbon is going to come out. We're not sure about how much and how fast. That's kind of the question I'm working on. If we don't change our emission pathways and we continue to burn as much fossil fuel as we do right now, then the Arctic doesn't really matter. It's like the amounts of carbon in the Arctic soils are big, but they're much smaller than the fossil fuel emissions we're releasing. So we need to see if it's going to be important or not. it's definitely very important for the local community. So the thaw of permafrost, everything in the Arctic is built on permafrost, and the permafrost soils don't contain only carbon. A lot of them have ice in them. So and when the ground thaws, that ice melts and drains away. So we're expecting in some areas up to 6-meter ground subsidence from the loss of ice. And not so much in America, but in the Americas, but in Siberia, there's large cities built on frozen ground, and they're all sinking into the mud. So it's a big challenge for communities.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
Guess we're gonna have to digest that information a little bit.
Yes.
But it's also something that we talk about internally, even though we work here at this very little ecosystem that we care so much about, the Bolsa Chica, this wetland. We do talk a lot about what is it that we need to do globally. We are definitely the embodiment. This organization is definitely the embodiment of think globally, act locally. So
yeah, a lot of your target species in the wetlands go to the Arctic, right?
yes, a lot of the birds, yeah, or migratory birds. Yes, definitely. It's all connected.
Yeah.
Yeah. So any other questions? Kim, I'm terrible. How am I supposed to let you moderate anything?
Good at it, Joanna. Actually, I have a question for you, Joanna, about the ocean, because the ocean, of course, is a big sink. But from what I understand, most of our phytoplankton is just in shallower water. So you have this massive amount of ocean. And I know people have talked about different ways of seeding the ocean so that you can increase the phytoplankton. How is that project coming along?
Oh, yeah. So that's very controversial. And most scientists that are experts in plankton will tell you that that's just a bad idea to be throwing fertilizers in the ocean, such as iron. Usually it's iron. So throwing iron to make phytoplankton grow. And the main reason, there are several reasons why that's a bad idea. I agree with those scientists who say that. But the main reason is that it really doesn't seem to be effective in the long run. You create a big, huge temporary sink for carbon in that spot, but that phytoplankton, as you guys know, get consumed very quickly, right? By what? Who consumes the phytoplankton?
Zooplankton.
Zooplankton, small fish, right? So you have all these organisms grazing on the phytoplankton. And so in a matter of weeks to months, those organisms will be respiring most of that phytoplankton back. The process of sinking carbon through phytoplankton takes a long time. We're talking thousands of years for the zooplankton poop to actually sink all the way down. It has to make to the sediment, then it has to become part of the sediment. The whole process takes a long time. Most of that carbon that the phytoplankton will be sinking will be respired back. Very little, very small percentage. We're talking, like less than 5% that actually gets exported to the deeper parts of the ocean, and less than 1% that actually becomes part of the sediment in any kind of meaningful timeline that we're dealing with for climate change. Now, the ocean is a big sink for carbon through another way, another process. Would anyone know what's the other process that the carbon is taking, that the ocean is taking carbon in? You guys went to the Climate Solutions Conference, you might remember that. So this is the biological, the phytoplankton is the biological pump, and then we have another pump, which is the chemical pump. And the pump, that we call them pumps because they're pulling out the carbon from the atmosphere. So that one is just chemical. It's just the ocean water is reactive with CO2 from the atmosphere. So anytime there's any CO2 hovering right on top of the ocean, and as you have waves breaking and wind blowing, that causes the mixing, that CO2 reacts with water, with the seawater, and actually chemically gets removed from the atmosphere, and it's sunk into the ocean. So that is actually happening, and it's happening more and more. The ocean continues taking up CO2 in that way. The problem is that it's changing the composition of the ocean water. Who would know the pH of seawater? Is the pH of seawater neutral, slightly acidic, or slightly basic? When we measure pH, what are we looking for? Who would remember that? Basic. Yes, slightly basic. And so what's happening is when we put CO2, it acidifies the ocean. It brings that pH to a different level. So you're bringing it down from 8 to closer to 7. And that's bad news for some organisms. Some organisms make their bodies with calcium carbonate. And that process that we call ocean acidification, it is ameliorating the temperature of the planet. If it weren't for this process, the planet would be much, much warmer by now. But
Yeah, about half of the emissions that we put into the atmosphere have gone into the ocean.
half of the emissions that we have put in the atmosphere have gone into the ocean. And that not to be confused with the heat, okay? So we have a certain amount of heat, about 80% of the heat that has accumulated in the atmosphere is being taken into the ocean. That's thermodynamics. That's a separate sink for heat, not for carbon. Yeah. And then on top of the heat sink, we have the carbon sink. That's half of our human emissions that have ended up in the ocean in this process. But it comes at a high cost because it acidifies the ocean. And then we wonder what's gonna happen when the ocean is saturated. So when that okay, now let's connect back to the phytoplankton. Who would know what organisms in the phytoplankton make their bodies with calcium carbonate? Not silicate, calcium carbonate. Diatoms, do diatoms make their bodies with calcium carbonate? Judy, you know this. You're muted.
Trying to unmute. Dinoflagellates.
Dinoflagellates, yes, a lot of the dinoflagellates, cellulose or calcium carbonate, yes. And then you have the pteropods, right? You have the coccolithophores, and all these organisms are very important in the plankton. So they cannot form correctly if you have this acidic ocean. Okay, so all connected, all sorts of problems. So to answer your question, Kim, yes, the ocean are doing a really important job, but at a high cost. And trying to geoengineer ourselves out of this mess using the ocean, not a very good idea. I think the plants there, the soils and the plants, restoring those ecosystems will just bring a lot of more benefits. We know very well how to do that. We have the science, we have the engineering, we have the technology. It's just really a matter of wanting to implement those regenerative processes, deforestation, and soil management too.
Yeah, soils can be not a major part, but definitely an important part of the solution, especially wetlands as well. So wetlands contain a lot of carbon in the soil, and as long as they're wet, the carbon's going to sit there.
Wetlands play a very important role. Peatlands, so all those ecosystems, aquatic ecosystems, they contain carbon in the soil, and like Claudia just said, if they're covered by water, that carbon is trapped. Judy, you have your hand up. Yay.
Yeah, okay, so we know that over 90% of the wetlands in the state of California have been developed. What does this play into this whole dynamic as far as the carbon?
That would be part of the land use emissions. So the carbon in the atmosphere has gone up due to land use change or land management change and fossil fuel emissions. And the destruction of wetlands is a form of land use change emission. So the peatlands, unless they were covered by debris and houses, that carbon has been released to the atmosphere, basically. That gets eaten up when the microbes have access to air. A lot of soils in California is the really productive agricultural. We have some of the best soils in the world in California. A lot of them have been severely degraded, and we could put more carbon in those soils, and it would help. It would benefit the plants that are growing on these systems, because organic matter that contains a lot of carbon also has a lot of nutrients in it, but it also would help with water retention. So improving agricultural soils can buy us some additional time, but the emissions are so much bigger than most of these other changes that we really need to get the emissions under control. And the easiest to do that is at the tailpipe, because once the carbon is in the air, we don't have enough technology yet to suck it back out because it's really dilute. We're talking ppm levels. Has a big effect of this, very dilute. So the best way is to capture it at the main production sites and then put it into fossil fuel They can pump the oil out of the ground and put the CO2 back down there.
And you know, this, what Claudia is talking about, which is, you know, this carbon capture. You might have heard of that, right? Carbon capture project. Sometimes when they have like a new power plant, they will have some kind of carbon capture and storage project. Have you heard of that? If you haven't heard of that, this is something that you can definitely Google. It's going to show up on Wikipedia. It's good for you to know. This is really important as we move forward to understand the limitations of this technology, but also the potential of this technology. Because we are going to have to be doing that, even in the best. Remember when we talk about the IPCC and all those projections that the scientists are making of like how warm the planet's going to get if we cut emissions by this much or by this much or by this much. Well, even in the best case scenarios, we are going to have to develop this technology of capturing the CO2 at the pipe, as Claudia was saying, like right at where it's being emitted, and then capturing it there and then putting it back into the soil somehow. And that is,
yeah, it's a great energy source, but we're making so many different things from fossil fuel, from oil. Like so much in our lives comes from these resources. It's kind of a waste to set it on fire. So we might need it to produce other things as well. And we're already past peak. So there's a lot of reasons why we need to get it under control. So I have a lot of hope in a way. I know we're not on the right trajectories right now, but I'm still hoping that advances in battery technology, changes in solar and geopower can get us out of this.
and in attitudes, changing like the general attitude towards what needs to be done, right? I agree with you, Claudia, too. And
yeah, but maybe even if energy was more available and cheaper and more local, we wouldn't have to all live in big cities. Maybe you could live anywhere if you weren't energy limited, do telecommuting. So I think it has a lot of other potential benefits to decentralize the grid. Anyway, but you guys are all amazing. The fact that you're interested in this stuff and trying to do your part and protecting a whole part of the landscape, that's quite an achievement. So
it was encouraging to see how fast our air quality improved in such a short period of time. You know, not just locally around LA, but globally.
Yeah. And the wetlands that you're protected, they also store a lot of heat, so they really help us with extreme weather. They help with flooding.
yeah. So we're almost out of time. If the citizen scientists can stay for a few more minutes after Claudia goes, I want to make announcements about next week. We're going to be talking about environmental justice, intersectional environmentalism next week. So I want to make some announcements regarding to that. But I have two film suggestions to make here. One is for Claudia. We have a 20-minute documentary about the history of this organization. I'm gonna send you the link. It's called Saving the Bolsa Chica, which is the history of how the Amigos de Bolsa Chica formed. And then I'm gonna take a suggestion from Claudia's class. When we took her class, she showed us this amazing film called The Symphony of Soils. Right? Symphony of Soils, is that what it's called? Is it available on YouTube, I think?
Part of it, I think, is. Yeah, it was made for the UN Year of the Soil.
Okay.
So I bought the DVD, and I think it's on YouTube now.
Okay, I'm going to look for it on YouTube, and I'll send to all of you, because it was really great to, of course, I got the privilege of watching the film and then having Claudia stop and explain things, and, you know, it's great, like, teaching for us. You won't have Claudia to explain the parts to you, but you can watch it. And if you have questions about what you saw, you can send to us all and we'll discuss here. And if we can't figure out on our own, then we'll email Claudia for help.
Yeah, you know where I am, so.
Right.
And I'm hoping, once we're back out of this, I'm hoping to bring my Cub Scout group out to the wetlands. So that was on the plan for this spring, and it never happened. So
very nice. All right, Claudia, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Do you want to say anything before she goes?
Thank you very much.
Right. Have a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yay! Isn't it great?
Yes.
Okay,
Very good.
I'm gonna let you all go. It's 8 p.m. I just want to make sure that I thank all of you again for coming, for showing up. I was so worried that my professor was going to show up and there will only be like 3 or 4 of us. So thank you for coming. And I know you enjoyed, right? Wasn't it
Yes.
great?
Very interesting.
So next week, we're going to be talking about environmental justice and intersectional environmentalism, which are topics pertaining to diversity, equity, and inclusion in all sectors of our society. That's important and that's urgent. And we're going to talk about how we, environmentalists, volunteers, activists, how we can make a difference within our own spheres. How can we start having conversations that will actually lead us to effective actions? And it might be something that we can start acting immediately, things that we can start changing right now, but it might also force us to talk about long-term planning, things that we want to see change in the next 2 to 3 years to 5 to 10 years. So I am going to prepare a little presentation to share what I already know about it. And whomever wants to also prepare anything, if anyone feels like they want to prepare something to share, feel free to do so. My presentation will be about 15 minutes so that we have enough time for discussion. So if you want to bring some slides, you can just prepare on your computer and I'll let you share. I'll allow you to share like I did with Claudia. And then if you don't want to prepare anything, if you feel like this is something that you're not ready to talk about, but you just want to listen, that's fine. If you want to ask questions or say something, this is going to be a safe environment to discuss whatever pertaining to this topic. What do you guys think? Good idea? I know I've been pretty overwhelmed and pretty sad at times, angry at times, exasperated at times. And for me, it has really helped to be able to, okay, hold on, Amber. Oh, okay, no, I already let, Annie, you're here, right? Hi, Annie. So for the longest time, Annie was in the waiting room waiting to be added.
It was only like 5 minutes. It's
I
okay.
really cannot do this job, guys. I kept like interfering with Kim's job and not able to watch the door.
No, it's okay. It was my fault. I was late anyway, so
Okay.
I'm glad I got to see
Sorry
part of
about
it.
that, Annie.
And I'm glad we're recording it so I can watch it later.
Yes. All right. So then, yeah, I don't want to keep you guys more longer here, but again, if you want to bring anything to discuss, that's great. If not, that's fine. The idea is that we have each other. That was my point, is that for me, what has helped me feel better about what's happening in the world is the fact that I know I have a group of people that I can trust, that I can share my feelings with and my plans with. And I want to make sure that you all know that you have that too, that we're here. So come next week, Thursday at 7. Anyone has anything else they want to say before we go?
Nice to see everybody. This is Nancy.
Hi, Nancy. I haven't seen you so long.
So yeah, it's wonderful. It was very good. It was very informative. I really enjoyed it. I'm going to come next week too. So thank you very much, Joanna.
Thank you, Nancy.
Nice to see everybody.
Nice to
Yes.
Oh, and don't
Absolutely.
forget,
Oh, tomorrow night?
tomorrow night we have new naturalists. They're finishing their graduation. There will be a proper meeting that they're going to have with Kim and Jennifer and Tom, in which they're going to go over all the actual business of being a new graduate from the naturalist class. How many of you have taken the naturalist class? Okay, so you know what it is like, right? Like, it's hard work. You guys have to study for a long time. I never took it because I'm so scared of taking it.
Me too.
So yeah, but it's a lot of commitment. And then these guys were about to graduate and COVID-19 happened and we all went in lockdown and they never had a graduation party. They never got the certificates. So that's going to be happening tomorrow. What time?
6 o'clock.
6.
But we are not supposed to join at 6. If we want, we can join in at say 6:30 just to make noise, just to applaud them, to have a party, bring your horns, bring your shakers. And we want to make sure we keep those people. We can't let them drift away because we don't have any tours for them to go. So, and then don't forget, bother your relatives that live in the Bay Area or in the Valley or anywhere else.
Do they just want California?
They just want California.
Okay.
I think that's their pilot's going to be just California, because they're trying to work with those other guys that published the data before. So I think they're trying to, like, you know, overlay their data on that stuff.
Got it.
Yeah.
Joanna, have they
Yes.
have they reached out to students? I would think all the students that are home, many of the science classes, I would think would love to get involved in something like this.
Right, they haven't. This is us. So if you have the means to do that, please do.
Okay.
Yes. So they're reaching out. They haven't done anything. They posted this on their social media, but I know Claudia is a top scientist in the world. So the woman that you guys just watched present is one of the top leading scientists in permafrost in the world. And right now she's stuck at home with 2 kids, 1 dog, trying to work and do just like we're all trying to do. And she has all these grad students trying to build things. And that's, you know, so the fact that she was able to take 1 hour away from her work to come talk to us is amazing. And I think it really shows how we can help them. So yeah, that's a great idea, Vicki. If you know
Okay, great. I do. I know principals of schools. I know people trying to think of things to do. So I'll let them know.
Yes.
All you have to do is offer a kid extra credit. And
exactly.
Right. And so I will update, put better pictures in the link, but you have the link, right, to Amigos de Bolsa Chica. We created a page there. It has the videos and it has the address, and I will put some better pictures to help people identify.
Okay, great, thanks.
So, and I can share with the California naturalists as well.
Thank you. Yes, let's do that. All right.
Yeah, and I would think CalFlora or those guys.
Native Plant Society might be a good one as well.
California Native Plant Society would be perfect.
So do it. You know, I'm not going to be able to do it. I'm working on a summer institute for teachers. So that's what I'm doing nonstop. So I won't have time to push this forward. But oh, goodness gracious, please do. Please share the link with everyone that you think might be interested. I mean, worst gets in there, they don't do it.
Exactly.
So what?
Orange County California Native Plant Society, yep.
Very cool.
Great,
right,
thank you.
Bill, are you okay there? I see some ducks coming out of your ear.
Well, I don't understand what's going on. Something's really, must be my iPad that's acting.
It must be your iPad. Do you guys want to see what happens when I try to put a background? So my computer is really, have I showed you this? My computer is very, very old, guys. And so where do I don't even know where I go for this anymore.
And the video, next to the video.
Next to the video? Okay, so watch this. So if I try to put a background.
Oh, wow.
Here. And then, like, you know, if I put an envelope though.
Like I'm on psychedelic mushrooms.
Right. And I can do that in several different places. I can, you know, with the bridge. I put something white, then it appears.
Yeah, it looks like my head's exploding or something.
Too much information. TMI.
TMI. Yeah. So that's it. So so then I can't have that. I have to go none. And I created my own background here for you guys. I put this poster, which now is too much, but yeah. Okay, I love you all. It really is great to have you every Thursday to hang out with. I'll see you next Thursday.
All right. Thanks, Joanna. Thanks,
Joanna.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you. Bye, Kim.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Patty.
Thanks, Joanna.
Bye.
Bye.